Okay, good morning, Masterclass, and it is April 11th, 2021. And I'm glad I have the little date on the computer so I don't have to remember that. I can always look. We are recording and we are doing Numbers 20 through 36 today. And this is a part of the Bible that I really like, but a lot of people don't so much. And we're going to talk about some things that maybe you've never thought of before today. And so I hopefully you'll find this to be an especially interesting class for numbers. So before we get started, was there anything anybody had to say about the video or the study guide that they wanted to bring up? And if not, we will jump into it. All right, so we will jump into Numbers 20 to 36. And before we jump into it, though, I want to talk about worldview. Have many of you ever studied the subject of what a worldview is or thought about it? It's become one of my favorite topics. So a worldview is how you see the world. Just what lens are you looking at it through? So today, especially, we're going to talk about two major worldviews. If you were to go to Wikipedia and look this up, you would find out that there are some major worldviews. And one of the worldviews is the one that we in the US have, which is guilt and innocence. We live by the rule of law here in the US, and we see things through that lens. You are either guilty or you are innocent. And in fact, one of our favorite sayings is, you are innocent until proven guilty. And the reason we say that is you cannot prove innocence. You can only prove guilt. So that's why that saying's that way. So you have to assume people are innocent because you can't prove it. And I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but we see Westerners, when I say Westerners, I mean US, Western Europe primarily, Canada. We see things through that lens, and we see everything through that lens. When we read the Bible, we read the Bible through that lens. And it's easy for us because we say things like, oh, well, the 10 Commandments, that started it all. So now it's a commandment. It's either right or wrong. You either broke the 10 Commandments or you didn't break it. And so we see that, the world through that way. However, Asia, much of Africa, a lot of the rest of the world sees things through the worldview of honor, shame. In fact, my example for this always is the kamikaze pilots in World War II. If you had asked the Japanese pilots to plow their plane into a ship for the honor of the emperor and the honor of their families, they did it. No question about it. If you'd asked the American pilots to do that for the honor of the president and the honor of their families, they'd have looked at you like you were crazy because they did not have that worldview. Okay, so those are the two major worldviews: guilt, innocence, and honor, shame. So how do you think the Middle East in the time of Numbers, which we're studying today, that had a worldview of honor, shame? That was the worldview that not only the Israelites had, but everybody else had that too. Okay. And one of the reasons is because when you have scattered societies, when you have scattered peoples, you don't have a common law. So you can only function through an honor shame society. Okay. So sometimes and specifically when we talk about the video today, why was Phineas, why did God like him and love him? Because he was zealous for God's honor, right? That was the whole thing. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, and what we'll be talking about more specifically in 2 weeks, we're going to have a special lesson on this topic, or this topic will be included in that. We will be talking about honor, shame a lot. Okay, so that's a worldview. Now the Israelites became a special people because although the honor, shame worldview was theirs, like it was everybody else, once they got the commandments from God, now they have an overlay of guilt, shame on top of their honor, shame society. So the Israelites are in a special worldview, and you can imagine why sometimes they get a little mixed up, because it's hard to keep both an honor shame worldview and a guilt innocence worldview at the same time. So that's a little bit about honor shame, and we will talk about that as we go through the scriptures later today. The other thing I want to talk about is the whole idea of God asking the Israelites to wipe out the Canaanites. That doesn't seem like a very godlike thing to do, but at least a good God. And so that's going to be another big part of what the session we have in 2 weeks is going to be about. How can a good God ask the Israelites to wipe out these cities, including men, women, children, and animals? So that is the reason we're going to do that is because I think that is a specific reason why a lot of people don't want to accept the Bible, and they don't want to accept God, because they cannot accept a God who would do that. So I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard somebody say that. I have several times. So we're just going to spend a whole week talking about that subject. How can a good God ask the Israelites to wipe out the Canaanites? So that'll be coming up. So when we see some of the things today, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that subject today, because we will come back to it. But one thing that will be part of that is something I will talk a little bit about today, which is the whole idea for the last several weeks as we've gone through Exodus and the first part of Numbers. I kept pointing out that God said he would drive out the Canaanites before the Israelites got there. I don't know if you guys picked that up, but several times I pointed it out. Here's a passage where it says God is going to send his angel to drive out. He's going to send his hornet, which is a kind of an odd thing to do. But whatever a hornet is, he was going to send it. But God specifically was going to drive out the people slowly ahead of the Israelites so they could just walk in and take a productive land over. And that seems to be God's plan. Then when we get to Numbers 32, all of a sudden we're going to see this as the plan changes. And so after the incident on the plains of Moab, we're going to see that the plan changes. And now the plan is going to be, Israelites, arm yourselves. You are going to help me drive out the Canaanite people and wipe them out. So the game's going to change, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today, but mostly we'll talk about it in a few weeks. The other thing I'm going to give you a jump start on is Balaam. When we read through the Balaam story at first, and many of you have probably read through it a lot through the years, Balaam is the prophet of God that was called in by the Moabite princes to curse the Israelites. And that's when we have the talking donkey incident. Balaam gets there. Balaam can't curse the Israelites, and he has to bless the Israelites. The Moabite princes get angry at him and send him home. And if you only read that, you would think, okay, Balaam's a pretty good guy. Right? But there is a scripture that we're going to look at first that's going to put this all in context. And I'm going to jump ahead, and that it's kind of a hidden little scripture or set of scriptures that is going to put the whole Moabite incident with the women in context. Okay, so let's jump ahead. Let's go to Numbers 31:8. So Numbers 31:8. And this is after the incident on Moab. This is later when God tells the Israelites to treat the Moabites and the Midianites as enemies and wipe them out. So that's where we are when we get to Numbers 31. And starting in Numbers 31:7. They fought against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses and killed every man. Among their victims were Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. They also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword. So the Israelites are going to kill Balaam. The last time we saw Balaam, the princes of Midian had sent him, and Moab had sent him back to his home. Well, now all of a sudden he's dead. The Israelites kill him. Why did the Israelites kill Balaam? He blessed them. We're getting ready to read one of the most interesting verses in the Bible. Let's go to Numbers 31:15. And this is Moses getting upset because the Israelites did not kill all the women of the Moabites. So this is Numbers 31:15. This is one you need to underline in your Bible when you get there. Have you allowed all the women to live? He asked them. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord in the Peor incident, so that a plague struck the Lord's people. What happened was, after Balaam could not curse the Israelites, God wouldn't let him. It appears what he told the princes was, these Israelite men are slugs. Go send your women in there and entice them to fornicate with you and worship your idols, and the Israelite men are going to give in. They always do. And so he basically has advised the Moabites how to cause the Israelite men to fail. So the whole thing we're going to read about on the plains of Moab was caused because of Balaam. Isn't that an interesting? It's very, very interesting. And you will also see that in the New Testament when it talks about Balaam in the New Testament. That's what they're referring to, is this one thing that Balaam advised. Now, I would have to say that if you were to put this in modern context, and the devil said, okay, how are we going to cause the church to fail? He could give exactly the same advice. But how are you going to cause the Christian men to fail? Send the women in. Send the loose women in, and the men are going to give in every time. And not all the men, but many men. So I don't think that story still has a lot of relevance for us in the church today, I think. Okay, so I've jumped ahead just so you could have a lot of context when we go back into Numbers 20. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, see if anybody has any questions or thoughts before I move ahead. All right, let's go back to Numbers 20. Numbers 20. And I'm about to confess that I don't know in the Bible when we talk about the Israelites. We've already talked about the Israelites got the commandments at Mount Sinai. Then they moved toward Canaan, and at Canaan they listened to the 12 spies. And because they listened to the 12 spies, God sentenced them to wander in the desert for a total of 40 years. Right? So we've already done that. When I read the Bible, I am not sure when that 40 years starts and when the 40 years ends. And you see it in Numbers starting in 20, and then in Deuteronomy 1 and 2, when you see a recap, you can't tell, or at least I can't tell, and most people can't tell exactly what incident is before and what incident is after, or what incident is during the wandering. Now, we will definitely see some things that we can say, okay, that's before, and some things are after. But generally, it's hard to tell because you just don't get hardly any information about the wandering in the desert for the over 38 years. It looks like they just say, you're going to have to do it, and then it's over. So that's what's going to go on. Generally, the big picture is they refuse to go in after the spies. God sentences them to 38 years in the wilderness, 38 more years. They wander in the desert and in the wilderness for 38 years. Then it's over, and now they're going to go to the plains of Moab to get ready to invade Canaan. And the first invasion, of course, is going to be Jericho. So how are they going to get from wherever they are in the wilderness to the plains of Moab? That's the part of the story that it's a little unclear how it happens. So the first thing so we're going to start and just kind of go through, and I'm going to make a couple of assumptions. And so just bear with me on the assumptions. I'm going to assume that in 20, the water from the rock, I think that happens before the 38 years, but it could be after the 38 years. So, but that's where Moses strikes the rock that he was commanded not to. And God tells him in verse 20:12, because you do not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. So that's what's going on. Now, when we get to verse 14, that is clearly on the way to the plains of Moab. Verse 14 is after the wandering in the wilderness. So Moses says he sends the messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. And he's saying, basically, let us go through your land and we won't do anything. And when you look at verse 17, please let us go through your country. We will not go through any field or vineyard or drink water from any well. We will travel along the king's highway. Now, if any of you have been to Jordan to go see Petra, some of you on this call I think did, we traveled on the king's highway. It is the main north-south highway through Jordan from the Red Sea going north to its capital. That is still the same thing. It was the main trade route. So what Moses is saying is, we will stay on the trade route. We will not get on the trade route. We will not get off the trade route. We will not harm your country. Just let us pass through. That's this whole thing in Edom. But Edom says, you may not pass through. If you do, we will march out and attack you. And again, the Israelites plead with them. But the Israelites say no. So Edom does come out with them a powerful enemy and refuses to let them go. So now, from now on, Edom and Israelites are going to be enemies. From this, they had common ancestors, but from this point forward, they're going to be enemies. Then we have in verse 22, as the Israelites are moving from Kadesh to Mount Hor, they've somehow avoided Edom, and I don't know how they did that, but somehow they've avoided Edom, and they're moving up north, and then Aaron is warned he's going to die, and he dies. So now we have the death of Aaron. We've already seen the death of Miriam, and so that's what's going on. They're on their way. Remember, they're on their way to the plains of Moab after the wilderness. Then we see the Canaanite king of Arad, who lived in the Negev, heard that they're coming, so he attacks and captures some. And then the Lord lets them destroy them. Then we have the story of the bronze snake. I'm in Numbers 21:4. And this is, they're traveling around the Mount Hor. Apparently, again, the people once more unhappy because they don't have enough food and water, they don't think. So they complain about it. And this time, God sends venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. So the people confess that they sinned. And then we see in verse 8 something that's really weird. The Lord said to Moses, make a snake and put it on a pole. Anyone who is bitten and can look at it, anyone who is bitten can look at it and live. So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. Then when anyone was bitten by the snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived. Now, you got to admit that looks like a whole bunch like making an idol. And the only thing that I can see that differentiates that is God's commanded them to do that. Now, later, we will see that that's a foreshadow of Jesus on the cross and salvation of Jesus being lifted up and people who look to him live. So you have the foreshadowing there. But it's kind of weird to me, I just have to admit, because they've done nothing but been warned not to worship idols. So you can put that in your pile of things that when you die and go to heaven, that's when you can ask God about, is that, why did you choose to do that, God? Because it does look a little out of place. Then we have the Israelites are moving on. Now they've got to go, they're still moving north, and Moab is the country next to Edom. So now they've got to try to go through Moab. Same story. They set out, they're going through Moab. The Lord tells them not to do anything. And in another place, we'll find out they basically have the same issue. The kings of Moab say, can't come through here. So they've got to somehow go around. Now they get to the land of the Amorites, which is, I think it is north of Moab and south of the Ammonites. So you have the Amorites and the Ammonites. Okay, they're not allowed to go up theoretically into the land of the Ammonites, but now they want to go through the Amorites. Same request as they had to the Edomites. Let us pass through your country. We will not turn aside in any field or vineyard or drink water from any well. We will travel along the King's Highway. So you have the same major trade route, the King's Highway, going north, and they're just saying, we'll stay on this trade route. We're not going to bother you. Don't bother us. We won't bother you. And it was accepted. If you were trading, you could go on the King's Highway. So they're just saying, let us do what everybody else could do. Verse 23, but Sihon would not let Israel pass through. So God says, okay, we'll take you out. So in verse 35, they strike him down together with his sons and his whole army, leaving them no survivors, and they took possession of his land. Now that verse is interesting, and I hope to remember to come back to it when we study in 2 weeks this whole issue of God and the Canaanites. Verse 35, does that mean that they killed every single man in the army of Sihon? Or does it mean that they killed the sons, the king and his sons, and wiped out the king? They wiped out the king's family. And I will say that I have started coming to the conclusion more often it means that they wiped out the king and his family than they wiped out every person. Because I think what they're trying to do is take out the identity of the king and the identity maybe of the whole country. You destroy a country when you take away its identity. You don't have to kill every person. So we'll come back to that in 2 weeks and give you more on that. But sometimes I think we overread some of these passages because we're not used to thinking about kings and the importance of the kings. Now we have verse 22. Then the Israelites traveled to the plains of Moab and camped along the Jordan across from Jericho. Okay, so for where the Israelites now have been, they've been in the wilderness. They somehow got by Edom. They got by, and now they've gone past Moab and then ended up on the plains of Moab. To give you geographically what that looks like is you have the Jordan River is going from north down to the Dead Sea. Next to the Jordan River, you have the plains, which is very fertile, good farmland. Then it goes up into mountains, okay? And the King's Highway is up in the mountains. So they wanted to go up the mountains and come around. We're not sure how they got there, but somehow they end up on the plains of Moab. Jericho is on the plains of the Jordan River on the other side of the Jordan River. Okay, so the Israelites are east and of Jericho. And we don't know exactly how far north or south, but they're somewhere in there in the range of Jericho. Now, all they've got to do when you get to 22:1, They're prepared. God's ready. God's going to lead them in. God, it looks like at this point, is still going to drive out the Canaanites in front of the Israelites without them having to do anything. That's all the verses that we've talked about up till now give you that. Then the Moabites are worried, so they call in Balak. Balak of the Moabites and Midianites calls in, and they send out for the to bring in Balaam, son of Beor. Okay, so they're going to bring in Balaam to curse the Israelites, get rid of them. Now we see here that it seems like they're using interchangeably the terms the Moabites and the Midianites, but they are two different groups. The Moabites live in Moab. The Midianites are more of a transient people. They live in Midian. You remember we had the priest of Midian, which is south, but it seems like the Midianites are they're transient people. They just travel around. So in this case, they have teamed up with the Moabites. So you have the Midianites and the Moabites that are on the same team against the Israelites. And I don't want to go through this whole story of Balaam, but we have done it before. I do love the story of the talking donkey. So if you haven't read that, make sure you go back and read that in Numbers 22, where the donkey is able to see the angel of the Lord and Balaam is not. And to me, that's one of those things that I use to think of the spiritual world is around us all the time and we just can't see it. But somehow God opened the donkey's eyes where he could see it, and then his mouth where he could do it. So sometimes if you want to pray to be a donkey, I would pray to have the spiritual insight that Balaam's donkey got to have. So as I talked earlier, so God lets Balaam go to the leaders of the Moabites and Midianites. He's not able to curse the Israelites. So that goes on for chapter after chapter, and eventually and I'm going to get down to it in Numbers 24. Balaam still is blessing the Israelites. He goes to his fourth message in chapter 24. He gives his fifth message in Numbers 24:20, and then he talks in verse 20. Then Balaam saw Amalek and spoke his message. Amalek was first among the nations, but their end will be utter destruction. So I don't know if you remember when the Israelites very first started on their journey, the Amalekites were the ones that attacked them. And God said, I will wipe out Amalek from the face of the earth. And so this is a prophecy that's following up on that. That's going to happen. Then we have verse 6, verse 25, that Balaam got up and returned home, and Balak went his own way. So that's where we see the end of Balaam, right? And if you don't read further, like we read earlier, that's when you would think, okay, Balaam he was great. He did what God told him to do. He didn't curse the Israelites. He went home. All's over. But then as we started the class, if you jump down to Numbers chapter 31:8, 7 chapters from now, you find out that what happened before Balaam went home was he told the Midianites and Moabites how to beat the Israelites. He's the one that instructed them to just say, send your women in and seduce the men, and it's going to be easy because the men are going to give in. So that's what we see in chapter 25, verse 1. So in chapter 25, verse 1, while Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices to their gods. The people ate the sacrificial meal and bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them. This is the incident on the Moabite plains. And then we get down to the story that was in the video for this week with Phinehas, where Phinehas, he sees the Israelite man bringing the Midianite woman in before the eyes of Moses in verse 6 of chapter 25. And then in verse 7, when Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he left the assembly, took a spear in his hand, and followed the Israelite into the tent. He drove the spear into both of them, right through the Israelite man and into the woman's stomach. Then the plague against the Israelites was stopped, but those who died in the plague numbered 24,000. The Lord said to Moses, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, has turned my anger away from the Israelites, since he was as jealous for my honor among them as I am. I did not put an end to them in my zeal. Therefore, tell him I am making my covenant of peace with him. He and his descendants will have a covenant of a lasting priesthood, because he was zealous for the honor of his God and made atonement for the Israelites. So if you don't have Numbers 25, 10 through 12 or 13 underlined in your Bible, you should take the time to do so. Being zealous for God's honor is as big a deal as you can do. That is big, big, big. That's why Phinehas is I think one of only two people that has a special covenant with God. Abraham had one, and then Phinehas has one that he personally has with God. Being zealous for God's honor. Now, that's why we talked about the importance of understanding the worldview of honor shame to those people. There was nothing higher than eliminating God's shame and increasing his honor. So that's the big deal for that. So I'm gonna pause a minute and see if anybody has anything they want to bring up. That's why Phinehas is one of my favorite people in the Bible. If you were to look at a list of favorite people, he would be high on your list of favorite people, or he should be. Now the plague stops. I'm sorry, and then in verse 16, the Lord says to Moses, treat the Midianites as enemies and kill them. They treated you as enemies when they deceived you in the Peor incident involving their sister Cosbi, the daughter of the Midianite leader, the woman who was killed when the plague came as a result of that incident. So the Lord's has them wipe out the Midianites, and the Moabites are now their enemies also from this point forward. And by the way, I've noticed a lot of people have just recently joined. I hate to tell you, but this class is almost over because we started at 9:50. All the Bible classes now start at 9:50. So if you want to join tonight at 5 o'clock, we will do this same class tonight for those of you who are joining in late. So now I'm to Numbers 26. Remember, we started Numbers with the census of the people. Now we have another census because this is after the plague. This is after the wandering in the wilderness. So we had the first census before the wandering in the wilderness. This one's after the wandering in the wilderness. And we see in verse 3, so on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho, Moses and Eleazar the priest spoke with them and said, take a census of the men 20 years old and more, as the Lord commanded Moses. These were the Israelites who came out of Egypt. And so they number through, and what we're going to find at the end of this, well, there's one little line I just want to put in here real quick. Numbers 26:11. The line of Korah, however, did not die out. Remember, we talked about Korah's rebellion where he and his whole family died. But apparently, again, when it says they all got wiped out, it doesn't really necessarily mean every single person. Because here we're specifically told the line of Korah, however, did not die out. And as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, bunch of the Psalms were written by, and and the musical service of the temple was taken over by the sons of Korah. So we're getting a lead in here that Korah's family is going to survive and be useful to God on a go forward basis. So through the rest of Numbers, there's some more talk about different feasts, Passovers, and so on. It's kind of a repetition of what we've read in previous chapters back in Exodus and Numbers. So we get through, I'm thumbing through here, we get to Numbers 31. And in Numbers 31, the Lord says to Moses, take vengeance on the Midianites for the Israelites. He's talking about the incident on the plains of Moab again. After that, you will be gathered to your people, speaking specifically to Moses. So the last thing Moses has to do is to send them into battle and defeat Midian. And then we get the verses that we started the class with in 31:7, where it says, Moses sent them into battle, 1,000 from each tribe, along with Phinehas, son of Eleazar. So Phinehas pops up again here. He's going to pop up one more time. He's the man who took with him articles from the sanctuary and the trumpets for signaling. They fought against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses and killed every man. Okay. Among their victims were Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. So again, it's specifically pointing out they killed the kings. They also killed Balaam, son of Beor, because as we read down in verse 16 further down, it was Balaam who advised the Midianites how to entice Israelites. So that all ties together once you see all of those things. Then we see again the things where they're instructed to wipe out, a lot of men, women, children. Sometimes they get to keep the goods. Sometimes God gets to keep the goods. And this is where we start finding out that there will be tribes on the east side of the Jordan River. Okay, we're led earlier to believe everything's going to be on the west side of the Jordan River. Now you get the idea that there's going to be some on the east side of the Jordan River. So we find out that the tribes of Reuben and Gad and half of the tribe of Manasseh will end up being on the east side of the Jordan River. And then we come to Numbers 32:20, and Moses says, if you will do all this, if you'll arm yourselves before the Lord for battle, and if all of you who are armed cross across the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven his enemies out before him, then when the land is subdued before the Lord, you may return and be free from your obligation to the Lord and to Israel, and this land will be your possession before the Lord. So he's specifically talking to those 2 tribes that they will get to go back on the east side. But he's also indicating for the first time that the Israelites are going to have to arm and fight in the invasion of Israel. This is the beginning of that. So where God was going to do before, now the Israelites are going to have to join in. And so that gets us through Numbers 31. And I'm going to see if there's anything. There's a recap of the journey in Numbers 32. Again, in Numbers 32:51, Moses is instructed to speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, drive out the inhabitants of the land before you, destroy their carved images and their cast idols, and demolish all their high places. Take possession of the land and settle in it, for I've given you the land to possess. Verse 55, but if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your side. They will give you trouble in the land where you will live, and then I will do to you what I planned to do to them. So where it was originally, God was going to do all that. Now the Israelites have to join in helping him. And it's going to be their fault if they don't drive them all out. So I'm going to stop there for numbers. We are going to see that Moses does not get to go into the land of Canaan. He is going to die and not being able to lead him in. So again, I will say to those of you who joined late, if you, from now on, starting actually last week, Bible classes start at 9:50 from now on, not 10:30. So class is actually over now instead of just starting. So if you missed class this morning and you want to join in, we're going to have class again this afternoon at 5 o'clock, like we always do. So you can join us in at 5 o'clock and hear probably one of the best lessons you'll ever hear on the book of Numbers, frankly. Actually, that's a joke, but join in. There are some interesting things that we talked about earlier in the class. So thanks everybody, and I hope you got to go to early service. If you didn't, go to late service and listen to Mitch give another great lesson. And again, join me at 5, and I will also send out the typical weekly email so you can keep up with what we're doing in class. All right. Love you all. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Phil.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Phil. Safe travels back home.
Okay, thank you.